this Reich thing that has come and gone. Essentially, a post that mentioned bringing back the Reich and using the word Reich, and then the post was taken down when there was a lot of backlash. Could you speak to what happened and your thoughts?
Well, this didn't happen by the inadvertent actions of a low-level staffer. This is Donald Trump has joined Sam Alito now. My wife ate my homework as an excuse. The reference to a unified Reich, somebody had to put it up there, and Donald for sure approved it because he pays attention to all the fine details and things like this. And it's another coded message. It's like when Donald says, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, but only for day one. You know, if you believe that, I would love to sell you a bridge in Brooklyn. It's absurd.
So is it? I mean, David, it's not a dog whistle. It's like it's a blinking, road sign.
Well, one of the things some Trump supporters will tell you is, well, how can it be a crime? He says out loud what he's going to do. So clearly it's not a crime. No, it's just a different way of approaching these matters. And Donald is signaling, exactly what he intends to do. So, if you're a woman and you want your menstrual cycle tracked and your pregnancies tracked, then you should vote for Donald Trump. If you're a journalist and you want to only be allowed to write what Donald Trump wants you to write, as he said, the law should require my approval, then you should vote for Donald Trump. If you are a minority and think white people should tell you what to do, you should vote for Donald Trump. I mean, it's not complicated.
Now to his trial. Yeah. And there are a couple of things that strike me that we need to keep in mind, David, and then I'm curious to what you think is important. But one of the things we should keep in mind is that with all of this different stuff, there are a lot of misdemeanors here that you have spoken of, and then you talk about the felony, the connection between a lot of what was done and trying to keep the information from the public. That's the felony part.
Corrupt the election. Right.
So save your prediction, although I think I recall it because you've tipped it in the weeks past.
Yeah.
But we'll reiterate at the end. But tell me, what happened yesterday when the defense brings on their witness and there's a whole back and forth with the judge that was unprecedented from what I was reading?
Well, I've never been in a courtroom in 7 years of doing this where the courtroom was cleared, except when a sheriff's deputy shouted that an inmate had gotten loose and gotten a gun. He was lying. The inmate was loose but didn't have a gun. And that cleared the courtroom, but that's because a judge did it. This is extraordinary. And what happened here is that Trump's lawyers have not been following normal and best practices for cross-examining a witness. But when Stormy Daniels and Michael Cohen and other witnesses get up there, you find the spots where you think you can zing them and undercut their credibility, and then you sit down. But in both Stephanie Clifford, as the porn star's real name is, and Michael Cohen, the lawyers went on and on and on, bringing up all sorts of nonsense, and it blew up in their faces. Then comes the defense, and they put on two witnesses. They put on a person to introduce a spreadsheet into the record, so she's immaterial. And then they call on a lawyer named Bob Costello. Bob Costello is a well-known lawyer in New York. He's been a complete MAGA lawyer representing various Trumpers for a long time. He was a prosecutor when Rudy Giuliani was the U.S. attorney in Manhattan. And he immediately begins expressing from the witness stand with his body language his contempt for the proceedings. And when the prosecutors hop up to make a motion to strike something from the record, before the judge can rule, he gives his answer. You don't do that. Once there's an objection, you shut up and wait. And when the judge issues a ruling the third, fourth, fifth time, I haven't read the transcript yet, he goes, geez. And the judge, says, pardon me? And not, pardon me as in, excuse me, meaning, what did you just do? And he says it again. And Costello then rolls his eyes and he gives him side eye and a bunch of other stuff. And Judge Marchand has the jury removed. And after the jury is out of the room, he clears the courtroom. And a lot of the journalists thought they could stay.
Right.
Understandably. I mean, I would have said, excuse me, this is a public trial, Your Honor.
Sure, I'm supposed to report on this.
Allow me to get counsel here to argue. There were actually lawyers for news organizations present. The judge made a transcript of what happened when the people were out of the room, but he basically dressed down the guy who's on your screen now, Robert Costello, and said, you know, this is not how you behave. You're not going to be contemptuous in my courtroom. And Costello didn't have anything substantive to offer. They put him on to show that Michael Cohen's a liar. It blew up on him. And juries, one thing I will absolutely tell you from interviewing many people who've been on juries after the trials, jurors pay attention to things like a defendant who rolls his eyes or whose witnesses do, because when you're holding the court in contempt, you're holding the jurors who are unpaid volunteers, or they get a token payment in some jurisdictions, to sit there. And, you know, why am I spending 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 10 weeks of my life to be insulted by the defendant and by a witness? This is
and the jury has a relationship in general, David K. Johnston, with the judge, meaning they tend to like the judge or form a bond over those days, or
they dislike the judge. I mean, I can't remember one trial that I covered years ago in Redwood City, where California, where it was pretty clear that the judge is not popular with the jury, but that's unusual. Typically, jurors look to the judge as sort of the father figure in the room. And
so, to your point, an insult to the judge is sort of an insult to the jury.
Now, the jurors didn't see any of this stuff. Let's be clear. And there was a transcript, and the judge had it released last night at about 7 p.m. East Coast time. So they were quite timely in doing this.
But wait a minute. The jurors did see the eye rolls and the
the jurors saw the contempt. They did not see, once they were removed from the courtroom, the clearing of the courtroom, which would have been prejudicial to the jury without a question. Nor did they see the interplay that we have the transcript of between Judge Marchand and the judge, after dressing down Costello, who is an officer of the court. It's not like, you know, I mean, I acted with great disrespect once to a disbarment panel in Washington, D.C., where I was subpoenaed and forced to go down there. And when they get to a key question, I suddenly look at these people and I say, excuse me, that date is after the events you're asking about. How could this person whom I'd never met, didn't know existed, have caused me to do these things, which is what you just asked me, when this date is later? And at that point, after some more questions, you know, I turned to the panel and I said, I can't believe you're conducting this proceeding. This makes no sense. You know, the prosecution here didn't even check the dates to see that the whole premise of their disbarment case against this lawyer is faulty. And I was surprised I didn't get dressed down or sanctioned for that. They just took it. But in a trial court, as opposed to a bar association proceeding, had I done that, I would expect the judge would have held the bailiff the minute I was off the stand to put me in handcuffs, and it would be $1,000 fine.
Sure, sure. There's a decorum that's expected.
And Costello did not help the Trump case, but
Costello, as you say, was there to run down the Cohen testimony. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't personally know this, but I've seen several of the lawyers acting as reporters who were in the courtroom speak definitively that Trump's lawyers told him not to put Costello on, and he demanded they do so. And they may be just acting from their professional judgment, because no competent lawyer on their own would have done this. And remember, this is not the first time Donald's done this. And he talked himself into an $83 million judgment in the second E. Jean Carroll case by telling his lawyers what to do instead of accepting their counsel. There's a reason we call lawyers counsel. You're supposed to take your lawyer's counsel. That doesn't mean the lawyer's right, but that's what you're paying him for. And Donald is not a lawyer. He doesn't know the law.
The smack talking that Costello did, seemed very Trumpian. You know, it almost seemed as though if Trump was trying to inhabit the body of another person, it would be, you know, this guy Costello.
Well, that's why Donald wanted Costello on the witness stand. Now, Costello has a just horrible reputation.
Oh, is that right? Because I was going to ask you, was he,
yeah,
apart from that, a credible witness? I mean, you know, like rate the two, Michael Cohen and Robert Costello.
Well, Michael Cohen was a guy who, when he was paid very well to lie and bully for Donald Trump, did that. And when Donald Trump's Justice Department, as he himself called it, his Justice Department, put Cohen in prison for the same set of facts that are in this trial, different charges, but the same set of facts, he turned on Donald, and he's had a sterling record of being accurate and truthful since then. I did see some news accounts in places like Breitbart and, you know, that ilk of publication, the New York Post, that Cohen had been totally destroyed in the witness stand. The rehabilitation of Michael Cohen took minutes. And frankly, if the prosecutors had decided to just let it go and not rehabilitate him, that would have been a reasonable judgment. They basically didn't lay a glove on him. And by going after him in all this ancillary nonsense at Donald's insistence, it created several opportunities for Michael Cohen to hit Trump with a zinger. The best example of this was with Stormy Daniels, where one of Trump's lawyers, Todd Blanche, says, "So you've been out there selling merchandise and trying to profit off Mr. Trump's experience." And she goes, "Yes, just like Donald."
Yeah, that really was perfect, wasn't it?
Yeah.
A question from one of our listener viewers. Don't the Trump jurors have the ability to watch all the commentary that's on TV? So the judge clears the courtroom, but they can see everything that happened when they get home and watch it on TV. Doesn't make sense to me, but they're all binge watching on Fox and CNN, aren't they?
I don't believe that they are. I mean, jurors generally are very, very aware. If you were to do that and get caught doing it, you yourself can be prosecuted. You can just be held in contempt. And you know, go spend up to, I think the New York, the maximum is 10 days. It might be 30 in Rikers Island. So jurors take these things very responsibly. My wife was once foreman of a capital murder case. And all she would tell me is, I'm the foreman of a jury. That was it. And I, come on, husband, wife, marital privilege, you know. Now, as soon as she got home, after they convicted this guy, who I don't know why he went to trial because the evidence against him was so solid, then she laid out everything in the world because it's over. But jurors generally respect this. And remember, in this case, there are 6 alternate jurors. So if it turns out that somebody calls up the judge and says, this juror, I was seeing him sitting at the Starbucks reading the news account, that person can be replaced, and there are 6 other people who can be put on the jury, and then they restart the deliberations.
I'm just looking at, and that's interesting to note, because I think based on what you're saying, I have a different impression of the jury as people who, A, take it responsibly, but also take that responsibility seriously, also are sort of being watched by others. They're all watching each other. Maybe it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've only been on one jury, and I was very impressed with how seriously people took their responsibility. And I've interviewed lots of jurors after trials. Sometimes had to go find them because it was important to do so, as opposed to catching them on the way out the courthouse door. And people take this responsibility. I mean, we need to remember that most people behave well. Cooperation and trust are one of the reasons that we're not living in medieval or worse times. So, you know, when we do have somebody who misbehaves, like watching the news accounts, the court's already taken that into account with 6 alternates.
Now I will ask you, and I think maybe just to remind us, all it takes is one of those jurors that you're speaking of for us to have a mistrial, that they can't come to an agreement. And so rate the possibility of mistrial versus some of the other verdicts we could see.
I think there's 0 possibility he'll be acquitted. The prosecution absolutely has proved every element of the case, and they proved those elements without Michael Cohen, by the way. Because we have audio recordings and other records. But they needed Cohen because otherwise the jury would say, why wasn't he called? I would say the chance of a hung jury is very small.
Really?
Yeah,
really?
I think it's very small. And if the jurors come back because of a long deliberation, and after 2 days, we'll know there's probably something going wrong in the jury room wrong, maybe not be the correct word for that. There's something going on in the jury room. That's when the judge can ask, what's going on, and can question a juror in chambers. It's called an in-camera proceeding. Question the juror in private in chambers. The lawyers for both sides would normally be there about what's going on. And if the person indicates that they're not following the instructions by the judge and the law, then that person can be removed and another member of the alternate panel added to the jury, and then the jury would be instructed to start all over again.
It's interesting, David, that the rhetoric that Trump has offered around the judge hasn't changed, even as the judge seems, I know he had a blow up with the one witness, but he's pretty cool with Trump. He says, good morning, Mr. Trump. And, he's very, I'm not going to say he's deferential, but he's not jerky at all. And yet Trump, when he goes out, man, he just blasts the guy as though he were being, tortured in some kind of medieval rack when he goes in that.
And Donald, lies and says, I'm being prevented from campaigning. He had a right to go to trial last year. The timing of this is entirely Donald Trump's choice. And here's how bad the lies are with the Trumps. Eric Trump, the second son, posted a video today on Twitter in which he says, here's the crowds, supporting my father. The video is from President Joe Biden's April visit to Manhattan. And it is, there's not a single MAGA sign or red cap there it is on the screen right now.
Oh my God, that's brilliant! I didn't know that or see it.
And you can excuse it away and say Eric Trump is dumb because he's not very smart. But I think the better answer is this is what the Trumps do. They just make stuff up in line. Now I noticed in the comments somebody points out Michael Cohen admitted he stole money from Donald Trump. Actually, the story is much more nuanced than that. They dealt with it on redirect, and I don't remember the details.
It wasn't that it was stolen. It was that they used the word stolen, and he sort of acceded to their verbiage or their characterization. But the reality is it wasn't stolen. It was just the reimbursement was in excess of the amount that was then paid out. It's not.
But let's assume for the moment that's true. We're talking about two criminals here who were in a conspiracy to corrupt an election. The prosecutors put on, they got 5 men who raped some young woman, and one of them turned against the other guys to make a deal. Well, he's still a rapist. He may have made a deal for a shorter prison sentence, but who do you think is going to turn in criminals engaged in criminal conspiracies? Catholic nuns? I mean, let's not, whoever the person who posted that, let's live in the real world. Law enforcement uses hitmen, major drug dealers, embezzlers to rat out the other crooks.
Are the jurors aware that Trump has been found in contempt of court, asks Trevor?
I do not believe so. I think all of this took place outside of the presence of the jury. And the criminal contempt, this is not civil, this is criminal contempt. This is going to come home to roost at sentencing. That's when the judge will, judge has a lot of discretion. He could just let Trump walk. He could give him unsupervised probation. He could give him probation. He can give him, I think the maximum is 10 years in prison. And this will come back to him at sentencing.
Trump may well be found guilty, but because he's rich, he can twist the appeals process for so long he may never spend jail time, says Les.
I do not expect, assuming the jury comes back next week, they're going to start deliberating late Tuesday, as it stands now, and finds Trump guilty. I do not expect he will be put in handcuffs and hauled away. Judge Marchand will order a probation report. That's a standard thing you do, a report in the background, the defendant, and whatnot, and hold a sentencing hearing down the road. When the sentencing hearing is held, he will order Trump, if he's going to impose a prison sentence, taken into custody, or will give him a very short period of time, 10 days or a week, to get his affairs in order. Trump was not going to be able to delay the prison time. I don't think the Intermediate Court of Appeals or the top Court of Appeals is going to delay a prison sentence for him. He doesn't have, if there's a case where there's a lot of question about how solid is the jury verdict, you might do better there. This case is so solidly proven by the prosecutors, they were absolutely brilliant, right down to Todd Blanche, in questioning Michael Cohen, made a huge deal out of Cohen saying that he has a phone call with Schiller, who was one of Trump's bodyguards, his #1 bodyguard, and that he then spoke to Trump. And they tried to show that Schiller was several miles away. And then on redirect, the prosecution produced a C-SPAN screen grab, which you can go to C-SPAN and go see it for yourself, 2 minutes before the phone call, of Trump and Schiller being together. And the Trump lawyers started to fight this tooth and nail, telling you that Donald was telling him to do this. And the prosecutor said, well, you're fine, Your Honor. We can have a recess. We'll fly a witness in from Louisiana to establish the truth of this, whereupon they persuaded Trump that that looked even worse to the jury, to make them sit around to get somebody flown up from Louisiana. And that totally backfired on him, because Trump and Schiller were right next to each other 2 minutes before the phone call. This is just a wonderful example of how Donald, by ordering people instead of listening to good advice, screws it up.
As we finish our last couple of minutes, this from James. It's still unclear to me, he says, do they have to prove he knew he was breaking campaign finance laws?
No, what they have to prove is that he knew he was part of the conspiratorial acts to corrupt the election. That is, if his purpose was to corrupt the election, that's all they have to prove. And they've proven that. That has become an indisputable fact, because, among other things, Trump tried to delay paying Stormy Daniels, and then one of his defenses had been, well, I was doing this to protect Melania from the knowledge of this. In fact, we have the indisputable evidence that Donald said, no, try and delay the payment, because if we can hold off till after the election, I won't have to pay her. If I'm president, it won't matter. And if I lose, it won't matter. The prosecutors have proven their case. There's no question that they have proven their case. And the argument that they're bootstrapping a bunch of misdemeanors into a felony, prosecutors do this all the time. We have prosecutions all the time with this string of misdemeanors, which put in the context of what was happening. And a good example of that is conspiracy law. Conspiracy law is designed to enable prosecutors to leverage people to rat out the other conspirators. And it gives a great deal of leverage. And the only way you can get out of a conspiracy, you could be in a conspiracy with people you don't even know, you never met, but you're all working on the same purpose in different places. And unless you take a step to renounce, for example, you get up and say, hey, I'm not doing this, and walk out of the room, or you go call the prosecutors or the police and say, you need to know about this, you're part of that conspiracy.
That's wild. Just wild. I have a question for David K. Johnston, but it's sort of like one I can move to next week. I feel like I don't want to take too much advantage.
That's all right. Go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. This is a kind of jetliner review question. Mark, can you please ask David what he believes is the biggest threat or scheme that Trump may pull to bias the 2024 election? You can see what I mean. It's kind of like a grand.
Yeah, no, but I mean, if that's a real legitimate concern, there's a very heightened awareness of the need to protect electronic voting machines and other actions, and much more so than in 2016. A number of foreign governments, including the Iranians and the
Russians, I would think.
First and foremost, the Russians, then the Iranians, the North Koreans, even the Israelis are trying to interfere in our election. China's trying to interfere. Let's not be naive about this. The U.S. government has overthrown many governments. The reason we have all this trouble with Iran goes back to 1954, when the CIA overthrew Mossadegh, the elected leader in Iran, and put in place the Shah, who eventually, with his Savak secret police, became this horrible tyrant. And everything about the rise of the Khomeini class of Islam as a religion of hate all goes back to that, and then before that to the British. And there's a long history, none of which Donald knows, by the way, none of it, not even on the most superficial way. And so there are going to be these efforts. We should be most concerned that highly targeted advertisements bought on Facebook, Twitter, threads can interfere with the election. At a investigative reporting conference 10 years ago now, Google sent a representative to teach people how to do image searches. They showed a picture of a high-rise building somewhere in the world and said, "What's the phone number in the window of?" And the guy put a pointer on it. And then he went through the steps where they figured it out, and they call, and the person answers the phone, and they go to the window. And it's just astonishing what you can do, right? And I asked after that meeting, I said, okay, look, I want to know how targeted you get. And I'm trying to remember exactly what I said, but it was in the vein of what I'm about to say. I said, what if I want to buy an ad for lesbian couple who are homeowners, have 2 dogs, and I want to sell them Subarus? And he looked at me like I was an idiot and said, yeah, piece of cake. Because, you know, you and your buying habits and your travel habits, that's the product. So whenever you're on the internet, and even when you're not at Facebook, you're somewhere else, you're reading the Los Angeles Times online, they're collecting data unless you know how to go into your computer and stop all the data collection. Yeah. And so they don't know you as an individual, but they know exactly how to say, gee, I want someone who lives in the 14610 area code, has a pond with a waterfall with goldfish in their yard, has no children living at home, drives an electric car, and that's me. And they could target me.
It's remarkable that they may know many of us better than our spouses do, you know, in terms of our likes and dislikes.
Yes.
It's eerie, but you're saying essentially that data collection is weaponized, and now those technologies have evolved to even more specific and efficient places, and so that's what makes this election
and those
particularly
countries'
tough.
interests in trying to influence our election may not make a lot of sense. I suspect the Iranians will be a lot better off if Trump is not president, because Trump not knowing anything could create all sorts of trouble. And Trump is very much in the pockets of the Saudis, the Emiratis, who are the bitter enemies of the Iranians. They may or may not see it that way. It is very unfortunate that we had this helicopter crash. I was on Saudi Arabia TV about this yesterday. Because of the sanctions, which we are enforcing and they are working, the Saudis, like the Russians, can't get proper replacement parts. And the president of Iran was in a 45-year-old Bell helicopter, originally designed for the Canadian military. They're probably using homemade parts that may not meet the standards. And on top of that, you know, they flew off with 9 people on board in very, very rugged terrain, the most rugged terrain in Iran, in fog. You know, I'm sorry, did nobody pay attention when Kobe Bryant died? Yeah,
that's an odd decision they made.
Unless you've got radar, very sophisticated radar, you don't want to be flying a helicopter in the fog. The Iranians are blaming the sanctions, and the sanctions almost certainly played a role. They're certainly not going to blame the bad judgment of their president, but we were negotiating with the Iranians. The Iranians, when they responded to the attacks by the Israelis after Hamas of October 7th, sent a bunch of missiles at Israel, which killed, I think, exactly 1 person, and then stopped. It was a proportional response. And we just had it leaked Monday that the Biden administration is negotiating in Amman with the Iranian regime. And that got leaked because somebody wanted it out there. They thought it was beneficial to have it out there. We don't know who's going to be put up next, but we shouldn't think that the next person will be better. We should think of it the way we do with Putin. If Putin dies or gets taken out by the people around him, the most likely next person in line, and I'm terrible at pronouncing Russian names, so I'm not going to try, but I know who he is. He's worse than Putin.
Yeah, it's a Wizard of Oz situation, you know. The Wicked Witch is dead. Ding dong, the Wicked Witch. Uh-oh. But here comes the Wicked Witch of the West. She's worse. I mean, truly is both the case in Iran and in Russia. What a great parallel. Hey, David, love your stuff and love that you make time for us. Grateful every week for it. And
talk to you next week.
Look forward to more. Yeah. Thanks. David K. Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped. And please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.